Come see us on tour in Los Angeles, Honolulu, Dallas, Texas, Baltimore, Atlantic City, Cohoes, New York, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets, and only there.
Keaton Weiss here with Russell Dobler filling in for Jimmy Dore this week into Monday of next week. So we are yours and you are ours for the next 4 of these shows.
Like Crosby, Stills, and Nash sang the song.
That's right.
I am yours, you are mine. So, for our guest today, we have the amazing Whitney Webb. She has been a professional writer, researcher, and journalist since 2016. From 2017 to 2020, she was a staff writer and senior investigative reporter for Mint Press News. She's a contributing editor for Unlimited Hangout and author of the book One Nation Under Blackmail, about the connection between the U.S. intelligence services, organized crime, and Jeffrey Epstein. Please welcome Whitney Webb.
Good.
All right, so you recently co-authored a 3-part series on Bitcoin and stablecoin with Mark Goodwin, and he summed up the core thesis in an article recently. Bitcoin will circumnavigate the government and separate money from the state, while stablecoins aim to strengthen the dollar as the world's reserve currency, provide much-needed demand for government-issued debt reserves, and further perpetuate the U.S. dollar as the de facto medium of exchange to the unbanked citizens of the globe. At the surface, Bitcoin and the digital dollar appear as if oil and water, unable to coexist in the same space and molecularly opposed. And yet collectively, the dollar and Bitcoin are to form the backbone for an entirely new financial system, a yin and yang construction that allows an entirely new commodity class to coexist with a hyper-dollarized world. Okay, can you explain how the adoption of stablecoin and the adoption of Bitcoin are going to help to stop the tide of de-dollarization?
So it's really a 2-part system. So it involves sort of yoking the dollar in a de facto way to Bitcoin, and then basically boosting the price of Bitcoin through the roof, essentially, as a way to sort of allow the U.S. government to debt pardon itself. And one of the reasons, well, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, so I'll come back to that later. But basically, we've had so many wealth transfers in this country. We're at the point where the robber barons, the elite bankers, whatever you want to call them, have basically stolen everything. So now that they have everything, they want to move to deflationary money. And so the only problem they have left the only hurdle left to cross, right, is sort of this extreme U.S. government debt crisis that is about to be upon the United States and essentially been admitted by big-time congressmen like Paul Ryan very recently. And one of the ways Paul Ryan pitched getting out of that problem was starting to regulate dollar stable coins, many of which have now surpassed several nation states as the biggest holders of U.S. treasuries or, U.S. government debt in the world, right? So you have like the biggest dollar stablecoin like Tether now holding, more treasuries than, I forget exactly where it is in the ranking, but it's bigger than Germany and some other countries that have significant amounts of reserves. Unfortunately, I don't have the figures at the top of my head right now, but it's a very easy search to find, those exact numbers. But it's very significant and being talked about pretty widely. So stablecoins are becoming a way for the U.S. government to service its debt, and this is sort of being done throughout Latin America, especially where you have sort of this de facto, what I would call sort of covert dollarization happening. So like you wreck an economy like Argentina via the IMF, for example, which the U.S. military and documents published by WikiLeaks several years ago was referred to as a financial weapon of U.S. empire, right? So if you like wreck an economy and you destroy their currency, and then people flock to Tether or USDC or some other, because they can't get their hand on physical dollars. They can get their hand on virtual dollars. And that's happening in a big way in a lot of these economies that have become increasingly destabilized, arguably on purpose, by the US power structure. And then you have them becoming de facto dollarized as opposed to sort of formal dollarization, which took place decades ago in places like Ecuador, El Salvador, where those countries essentially lose a significant amount of their financial sovereignty because they're sort of at the whim of the Federal Reserve, which they have zero control over, right? So I'm not sure what else to add there. I sort of gave
so you're
review,
okay.
but the goal.
So you're saying in a case like that, all right, so their currency's been destroyed partly through IMF policy or entirely. So
or World Bank or the multilateral development banking system among, there's these vulture capitalist figures that have been a big issue in Argentina as well. Most of them are American, like Paul Singer, for example, is probably one of the most notorious. BlackRock is also one. Javier Milei in Argentina has been making deals with them. Yeah, he doesn't say afuera to BlackRock or JP Morgan or, plenty of other, or Silicon Valley. He's like, no, take over our government, please. It's kind of funny. He's like, yeah, like libertarians cheer him on because he's like, I'm going to get rid of the Ministry of Education. It's wasteful. And, maybe it is. I don't know. I'm not an expert on waste and, the Ministry of Education in Argentina, but he's pitched replacing it with Facebook's AI to train everyone in, all the young people in Argentina for the future of work. That doesn't sound like a great alternative to me.
Well, it's hard to tell. I mean, is that like doctrinaire libertarianism? I mean, libertarianism has become so self-contradictory at this point. Like, I don't know who the libertarians are, who the tech right are. It seems like libertarianism allows for infinite expansion of tech power, which I guess he's for.
I'm glad you brought that up. Because I think there was a deliberate effort by people like Peter Thiel, for example, and these Silicon Valley figures that frame themselves as libertarian to sort of hijack what people used to consider libertarianism, which was like a lot of concern about decreasing the size of government, maximizing freedom, maximizing civil liberty, things like that. That is not Peter Thiel libertarianism, like at all. But because he's sort of been able to mask himself as that, it's allowed him to sort of develop this other brand of libertarianism that you could argue is sort of taking over or really overshadowing the other type that perhaps, may have been more prominent in some circles a few decades ago. Right. Because there was a lot of commonality between anti-war left and sort of anti-war libertarians. And now that ability, that bridge that existed between those two groups is becoming it's being attacked. It's definitely been attacked. And there's a lot of libertarians now with this current faction that's coming into power that are very much cheering on what, seems very clearly to be an expansion of government actually in the surveillance state,
Yeah, well, it seems like their agenda is standard kind of Republican stuff, shrink the state in favor of corporate power. Only with this 21st century tech bro paint job, where you're really moving towards a kind of feudalism. It really, because a government of billionaires, where you have unelected people deciding what to cut from the government, and it seems like most of what they want to cut are things that restrain their power. I mean, what is that? That's a move towards a feudal system.
Well, I do want to point out really quick. I think DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, is really a Trojan horse for putting as much of government in the hands of AI as possible. And I think when you do that, that doesn't necessarily mean smaller government, right? Perhaps less humans in the workforce, but having like AI run all these different departments and programs and whatever doesn't necessarily mean the government is shrinking. It can mean the government human workforce is shrinking, but it's not necessarily the same thing. So we'll have to pay close attention to how that develops over time, because I suspect someone like Elon Musk, for example, who obviously has positioned himself to have undue power, considering that no one voted for him, is a big proponent of carbon taxes and carbon markets and a lot of stuff that conservatives and libertarians certainly don't like, and certainly would be an expansion of government. You're creating a whole new market, essentially, that civilians and corporations alike would have to play in order to meet, those quotas or however they choose to set it up. And I think ultimately it's very, very problematic putting AI in charge of government. It's actually something that Eric Schmidt and Henry Kissinger cheered on in their book, The Age of AI, Our Human Future, a very misleading title. It's about the post-human future that they envision. And basically, the way they sort of describe it, and I would recommend people read the book for themselves, but I sort of, my interpretation of it is that it's the ultimate kind of Wizard of Oz cover for the government to get away with whatever it wants. And honestly, like Henry Kissinger's wet dream. No wonder he was so excited about AI, because essentially, you can claim that, they argue that AI will become so much more intelligent than humans and think so differently that it could never explain how it reaches its conclusions to people, which envisions a future of computer says no, computer says yes, computer issues it, and you can't question it. It can't explain itself. We must trust that it's, in a kind of a religious way, that it's so much smarter than anything else. So if it says, Nuki ran, for example, and then they get in trouble for it or something, they'll be like, well, it was the computer and it's so much more intelligent than us humans. That's basically a way for them to get away with whatever they want. Just be like, well, actually the super intelligent artificial general intelligence that's smarter than God himself told us to do it. And we can't question that now, can we? That's basically sort of the setup. And, hopefully that's not the same thing Elon Musk and Ramaswamy have in mind, but I don't know. The lines between Eric Schmidt world and Peter Thiel-verse world are actually pretty thin. They're both on the steering committee of the Bilderberg Conference, and they agree on a lot more than they don't. They're both very closely aligned with the Department of Defense. As it comes to AI, Eric Schmidt basically wrote the game plan for how national security would use AI as head of the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence a few years ago. And of course, Peter Thiel, through many of his companies and the company he backs, is a major military contractor with a lot of ties to the national security state. And of course, not just the Department of Defense in Thiel's case, but also the CIA. And, they're really not that different in the end of the day. I think their sales pitches are different and how they frame stuff is different. So this particular camp that sort of claimed that they're the Silicon Valley libertarians are cloaking themselves in a lot of words like innovation, efficiency, and all of this stuff. But the problem is, AI as an industry is very overhyped. So for example, you could have a company say, like one company I wrote about during COVID-19 is an Israeli company called Diagnostic Robotics. And so they were picked by the Rhode Island governor at the time, who later became Biden's commerce secretary, to basically predict COVID outbreaks before they happen in Rhode Island. And they said themselves that their algorithm was roughly like 75% accurate, but that's like, the company's opinion. That wasn't independently vetted or anything. So it's probably closer to 60 or 50%, like a coin toss. So is it really more efficient to put an algorithm like that in charge of deciding public health policy, or if a particular community is locked down and its economic activity halted or something like that? That's just one example. Obviously AI is being applied to every sector, but there's been a lot of grift in this particular field. And it's also happened with, a former DARPA director had sort of a defense tech company. Her name's Regina Dugan when Obama was in power. And they got basically outed for having that. I think it was for detecting IEDs or the probability of them or something. I forget exactly what it was about, but it was found to literally be like a fraudulent algorithm. It was no better than a coin toss, and nothing happened to her. So this type of stuff happens in government all the time. And just because Elon Musk and Ramaswamy are at the helm of it doesn't mean that's going to happen. Specifically, when you look at Vivek Ramaswamy's, track record in pharma world of pump and dumps and things like that, this type of waste can still happen even if the government workforce is smaller. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what those policies are. But it's important to note that those people at Doge, and also, David Sachs is the AI crypto czar, who's also part of the PayPal mafia. None of them, as far as I know, have to divest from their investment interests.
Right, they're not elected.
Hey, a lot of us are trying to get our finances in order to start the year off right. And there's some great news for homeowners. Interest rates have dropped and are now in the 5s. If you have been buried in high-interest credit card debt, now's the time to break free. American Financing can help you access the cash in your home to pay off your highest interest debt. Last year, their salary-based mortgage consultants helped customers save an average of $800 a month. That's like giving yourself a $10,000 a year raise. What a way to start the new year. And if you start today, you may be able to delay 2 mortgage payments. Call American Financing today at 888-804-0303. That's 888-804-0303. Or visit AmericanFinancing.net/Jimmy. Come see us on tour in Los Angeles, Honolulu, Dallas, Texas, Baltimore, Atlantic City, Cohoes, New York, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets, and only there.